This is a story that took place when I was around 18 years old, and it still gives me chills just thinking about it. The mental trauma I suffered from the horrifying details of what happened several years ago still haunts me from time to time. I currently see a psychiatrist to help alleviate the mental distress, as I now tend to have spasms during my sleep due to the nightmares that manifest every night. It all started when I was in my first year of college. I was studying to be an accountant, which was relatively difficult considering the overwhelming amount of math involved. I worked several part-time jobs in addition to studying full-time, including being a cashier at a cafe located in my school's campus building. Obviously, minimum wage wasn't enough for my financial situation, so I applied for various jobs online during my free time at work. Paying off student loans was no easy task for students fresh out of high school like me, so I took any small job I could find. This included mowing lawns or shoveling snow during the winter in my neighborhood, and I even started babysitting for close friends or relatives. I would ask family members and even my classmates, despite the obvious aura of desperation I was giving off. I realized that babysitting was the perfect job for me since it allowed me to focus on my studies while the kids usually played video games or slept in their beds. There was a guy in my class named Jack with whom I used to do homework and exam prep. He referred me to a babysitting job that he liked. "Hey, do you still need a babysitting job?" "Sure, man. Do you have one?" "Yeah, my dad's friend has been looking for someone to watch his kids." "Great, sign me up." "Well, there's a catch. One of the kids is older than us, like in his 20s. "What the hell? Why would I need to babysit an adult?" "Well, I don't want to be rude, but he's a bit crazy." I remember babysitting them once, and it was definitely an interesting experience. "How so?" "He's just an odd individual. Imagine a 5-year-old in the body of an adult man. That's what he was like. But at least his parents paid me pretty well." "How much?" "About $200 a night, plus a tip if you did a good job or managed to get out of there alive." "Still interested?" "Sure." That's when Jack sent me the family's contact information. As I sat there, pondering whether taking the job was a good idea, I couldn't stop thinking about my student loans, which made me seriously consider accepting the job since I desperately needed extra income without too much interference with my studies. Anyway, I ended up saving the details on my phone and continued with class until it was time to leave. I remember taking public transport home and deciding to text the number, asking if they still needed babysitting services. The number replied, asking who I was and how I had gotten their number. I responded with my name, Matt, and mentioned that my friend Jack had referred me. The person then asked if I could watch the kids for an entire weekend, which would be 3 days and 2 nights. Honestly, I hesitated to accept the deal, but I eventually agreed since the idea of $200 per night plus a tip was an offer I couldn't refuse. When the day came, I took an Uber and was dropped off at the provided address. As I approached the house, I could see a vague figure watching me from behind the curtain of an upstairs window. I assumed it was the older son that Jack had mentioned. I casually walked up to the door and began knocking, only to be kindly greeted by the parents and the family's younger son. "Hi, Matt, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Hello." "Hey, I left $200 on the kitchen counter in case you want to order anything." "Great, thank you so much. We'll be back Sunday morning." "Really?" "Yes, sir. I'm sure you'll have fun watching my kids." "Is there another child I should be aware of?" "Yes, of course. This is my younger son, Facundo, and our older son, Charlie. He's probably upstairs watching TV or something. Charlie, come down and say hi to your babysitter. I don't like strangers. Come down now or you'll be grounded. Leave me alone, or I'll call the police. Sorry for the inconvenience, Matt. You'll eventually meet him. He's usually more friendly once you get to know him. That's fine. I just hope he doesn't mind my company. At that moment, the parents suddenly went blank, as if my statement had triggered some intense emotion. I was a bit puzzled by their expression, as it genuinely seemed like their souls had left their bodies. Then, the father snapped out of it and said, "I think they'll be fine. My wife and I need to go celebrate our anniversary now. Oh, and don't forget to fill the Chihuahua's bowl when it's empty, and call me if you need anything, okay, Matt?" "Alright, sir." Throughout the day, I spent most of my time studying and working on school assignments while Facundo played video games on his PlayStation in the living room. I found him to be quite low maintenance, and the same went for the other son, who was supposedly still upstairs in his bedroom. As the sun began to set, I couldn't help but make myself a sandwich since my stomach started to growl. I remember asking Facundo if he wanted me to make him something, but it was pretty clear that he was too focused on his video game, all while munching on a bag of chips beside him. I headed to the kitchen and began spreading peanut butter and jelly on a slice of bread at the counter. That's when I noticed a family portrait on the kitchen windowsill. It was a picture of the parents, Facundo, and, of course, their older son, Charlie, who appeared to be much taller than the rest of the family. I was a bit taken aback by the fact that I was now responsible for looking after a grown man of his size, considering he was older and much bigger than me. As I looked around the kitchen, I began to see more family portraits, except most of them included another younger boy in the photos. That's when I started to head back to the living room, and I couldn't help but ask Facundo who the other boy in the family pictures was. Facundo replied, his name was Martin, and he was my older brother. But he died. I'm so sorry. If you don't mind me asking, how did he die? Apparently, my Rottweiler bit him to death while my parents were out of town. That's why they had to give him away and get a Chihuahua. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. If I tell you something, will you promise not to tell anyone? Yeah, sure. What is it? Kid, I don't think it was the dog. I think it was Charlie who killed him. Why do you say that? Because he's a spoiled brat, and I hate him. Why do you hate? Why are you talking about me? Leave us alone. Charlie, I don't like him, and I don't like you either. Hey, it's nice to meet you, Charlie. My name is Matt. No, that's not your name. You're a liar. No, Charlie. My name is Matt. Liar. You believe him, but you don't believe me. Charlie, I believe you, okay? That's when Charlie stormed back to his room upstairs, stomping his feet on the stairs on purpose and shouting things like, "You let the dog kill Martin, that's why he died, liar." I then suggested to Facundo that we play some video games while Charlie started making disturbing noises, like banging his fists against the wall. Honestly, I was terrified, but I tried to ignore it because I wanted to comfort Facundo, who was visibly upset and shaken by the whole confrontation with Charlie. Around midnight, it was time to go to bed. I remember tucking Facundo into his sheets and then quietly walking down the hallway, passing by Charlie's bedroom, where I could vaguely see him watching me through the small crack in his door. "Hey, Charlie, do you need anything before you go to sleep?" "Yes, I want you to get me a cup of Facundo's blood." Sorry, Charlie, I can't do that." "Then I want to drink your blood." "Charlie, please stop joking around. It's not funny." "I'm not trying to be funny. We just want revenge." "Revenge? For what?" "We want revenge for Martin." Charlie then slammed his door in my face, and the intimidation shook me to my core. I started to stumble toward the guest room, filled with fear, and then crawled under the sheets. Honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about what Charlie meant by revenge for Martine and why on earth he would ask for a cup of my blood or Facundo's. Despite the strange encounter, I tried to dismiss it and began watching some movies on the TV to help me fall asleep. About an hour later, I was jolted awake by a loud bang in the hallway. I decided to check my phone to see the time. That's when I saw around 100 missed calls and messages from the boys' parents. I was a bit upset with myself since I could see they had been trying to reach me since they first left, but my phone had been on silent. Then I checked the messages and saw texts that said things like, "Don't forget to give Charlie his medicine before bed," or "Please find the meds on the kitchen table. He needs to take 2 tablets before sleeping every night." I immediately jumped out of bed and headed to the kitchen. As I opened the door to my room, I saw Charlie standing next to Facundo's bed, covered in blood. The walls and floor of the hallway were also stained with blood. It looked like a scene straight out of a horror movie, like The Shining. "Charlie, what the hell happened?" Charlie gave me a sinister grin, his mouth filled with blood. I ran to Facundo's room and saw him lying in his bed with half of his face mutilated and his chest cavity open, as if a wild animal had torn him apart. His internal organs were scattered all over the bed, and the sheets were completely soaked in blood. I noticed the Chihuahua sitting next to Facundo's remains, whimpering loudly, as if it was as horrified as I was. "No, no, no!" The dog ate him. At that moment, I heard a noise behind me and quickly turned to see Charlie standing in the doorway, the same sinister grin on his face. I was paralyzed with fear, not knowing what to do. Charlie took a step toward me, and at that moment, I knew I had to get out of there. I ran to the kitchen with Charlie close behind. My heart pounded in my chest as I desperately searched for something to defend myself with. I grabbed a knife from the counter just as Charlie entered the kitchen. I raised the knife, trembling, and yelled at him to stop. "Charlie, don't come any closer. Stay where you are." He stopped, but the grin didn't fade. He just stared at me, his eyes gleaming with a madness I had never seen before. Then, I heard a faint noise behind me. I turned and saw Facundo, or what was left of him, crawling on the floor, leaving a trail of blood behind. "Facundo!" I shouted, but I didn't know if he was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Charlie took advantage of my distraction and lunged at me. I fell to the floor, the knife flying out of my hand. We struggled on the ground, but he was too strong. I felt his hand around my neck, squeezing tightly. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision began to darken, and I thought this was the end. Suddenly, I heard a bark. Facundo's Chihuahua ran towards us and bit Charlie on the leg. He screamed in pain and loosened his grip just enough for me to break free. I got up and ran to the front door, the dog close behind me. I managed to open the door and dash out into the front yard. I screamed for help, hoping that a neighbor would hear my cries. I saw lights turning on in the nearby houses and knew that someone would come soon. But when I turned to look at the house, I saw Charlie standing in the doorway, staring at me with that same sinister grin. The Chihuahua was by my side, growling, but I knew we couldn't do much more. The sound of police sirens grew louder, quickly approaching. I knew I had barely survived, but the images from that night would haunt me forever. I never found out exactly what happened after that night. Facundo and Charlie's parents vanished, and the house was left abandoned. But every time I close my eyes, I see Charlie's smile and the image of Facundo crawling on the floor. And I can't help but wonder, is Charlie still out there, waiting for his next chance to get his revenge? This story took place several years ago when I was 17 years old. I was running some errands for my parents, wanting to ease their stress after a long work week. There's a local grocery store about 10 minutes from my house, so I usually did the shopping there for convenience. My dad would typically text me a list of items and give me his credit card, since I had just graduated from high school and didn't have a job. Honestly, I didn't even know what direction I was heading in terms of my career aspirations. The last few months of high school are usually exciting for most people, but they were extremely stressful for me, as the uncertainty about my next chapter in life constantly loomed over my mind. I remember picking out some canned food in one of the grocery aisles when my cart unexpectedly collided with someone else's. That's when I saw a large, older man with a beer belly and a scruffy beard, looking at me as if I had killed his dog or something. Then I noticed a pair of broken prescription glasses on the floor and realized that the impact of our collision must have knocked them off his face. As uncomfortable as the situation was, I picked up the broken glasses and began to hand them to the man, apologizing as I did. "I'm sorry, sir. It was an accident. These glasses are useless now. I definitely won't be able to drive home wearing these. I'm really sorry, sir. I didn't mean to. Did you come here with Mom and Dad, or are you here alone?" I came alone, sir. "How did you get here? Do you drive, or did you take the bus?" I just walked here." "Well, I'm going to need your help getting home. I can't drive without my glasses. How am I supposed to get you home if I don't have a car? Do you need me to call you an Uber or something?" "Kid, I don't want to crash my car. Do you have a driver's license?" "Yes." "Well, then you're going to need to drive my car so I can get home and grab my other pair of prescription glasses. Then I'll drive you back." I had never felt so uncomfortable doing something like that, but at that moment, I was young and naive. So I got the impression that I had no other choice but to agree to the man's request. As we got in line to purchase our items, at the checkout, I noticed the man was buying several packs of baby formula, diapers, and bibs. I assumed he was a harmless father who genuinely couldn't see well without the right glasses. So I decided to push aside any skeptical thoughts about him being a potential creep and proceeded to buy my items, following the man. We then walked to his vehicle and put our items in the back seat of his car. Even though I started to have doubts about my decisions, I had already gone this far. I'm just going to drive him to his house and then head back to mine. It shouldn't take long, just a few minutes at most. Everything's going to be fine, I kept telling myself. While I was driving the man's vehicle, he asked, "What are your plans for tonight?" "To drop you off at your house and then head back to mine. Would you mind watching my son for a bit? I need to go back to the store and buy more groceries since my shopping got interrupted because you broke my glasses." "Sir, I really can't do that." "Don't worry, it'll only be for 30 minutes to an hour at most. I'll be quick." "Sir, I really need to get home, please." "Kid, I'll give you $100, just please watch my son. I promise it won't take long." Honestly, I felt like the man was trying to bribe me, but at the same time, his story had some genuine aspects that made it more believable. So, foolishly, I agreed to his request, saying, "Sure, but please make it quick." It was about a 10-minute drive when we finally reached the destination. I remember seeing a 5-story building that looked run down, like one of those buildings with a business on the ground floor where residents lived upstairs. I also noticed an exterior staircase on the side of the wall, where the windows were, as if the building was some kind of old establishment that I wasn't used to seeing in the area. I remember leaving my groceries in the back seat of his car and walking up the stairs, entering his residence. As I opened the door, I was hit by a disgusting, foul stench, almost as if the house hadn't been cleaned in months. If I had to compare it to something, I'd say it was a mix of farm manure and expired cheese. Honestly, I felt like I was going to vomit. I started to wonder how a small child, or anyone for that matter, could endure such a rotten odor daily. My son should be in the last room on the right. He's probably sleeping now, but when he wakes up, just give him the bottle that's in the fridge. Okay? Please come back quickly. Kid, I'll be back in a bit. I stood there, feeling increasingly uneasy and wondering what I had gotten myself into. The man abruptly closed the door and left for the grocery store, leaving me in that place, unsure of what to do next. As I sat on the worn-out sofa in the living room, I started questioning again why anyone would feel comfortable leaving a complete stranger alone with their newborn. Then, I noticed a family portrait on the coffee table with a man and a child. I felt a bit confused because the child seemed too old to need baby care, looking around 10 years old. That's when I heard a loud noise coming from the baby's bedroom. I immediately got up from the sofa and cautiously walked toward the room. My heart was pounding, the tension in the room was palpable. I slowly placed my hand on the doorknob, counted to 3, and swung it open quickly, only to see the window completely open. Then I noticed there was no baby, just the same man from before, wearing a diaper and a bib, with a pacifier in his mouth. What the hell is going on? I thought you were going to the grocery store, I said, bewildered. The man spat out the pacifier and said, "Baby wants milk." What? Baby wants milk, or baby kills you. All right. Please don't hurt me. I'll get you milk. I went to the kitchen to grab the bottle of milk from the fridge while the man awkwardly followed me. Then he shouted, "Now sit on the sofa and feed the baby." My heart started racing a mile a minute. I couldn't shake the sick feeling in my stomach, but I felt like I was being held hostage at that moment, and I didn't know what the man was capable of. I sat on the sofa and began feeding the man the bottle of milk as he curled up in my lap like a newborn being nursed. It was clear that the man was mentally ill and had a fixation on playing the role of a baby. Then he stood up and said, "All right, baby needs a diaper change." "Man, please." I tried to reason with him, but he insisted. "Baby peed. Now change baby's diaper." That's when I saw a trickle of urine dripping from the man's diaper and down his leg as he screamed, "Leave me alone, or I'll call the police." The man headed to the kitchen and grabbed a large kitchen knife. I jumped off the sofa and started running toward the same bedroom as before. I immediately locked the door and could hear the man violently shouting and stabbing at the door. "Open the door. Baby just wants milk," he yelled as I made my way to the window. That's when I saw the decomposing body of a child inside the crib. I quickly ran down the exterior stairs and sprinted in the direction of the grocery store. I entered the store and started picking up the same items I had before. Then I called my dad, who ended up picking me up outside, as if the whole incident was now behind me. When I got home, I crawled into my bed and couldn't stop wondering if the body in that crib was the same child I saw in the portraits. And why on earth did that man pretend to leave only to run up the exterior stairs and dress up like a baby? As I share my terrifying story with the world, I sometimes kick myself for not telling my parents about this situation. I can only hope that the man seeks some kind of help. It was a traumatizing experience, but I live to tell the tale. This story happened when I was around 7 years old. I remember it vividly, as if it happened yesterday, because the event still makes me feel nauseous when I think about it. It all started when my parents left the house to attend a work dinner for my dad. They used to have these kinds of events occasionally, at least when someone from the firm was retiring. Personally, I enjoyed it when my parents went out for special occasions like this because I didn't have to listen to the constant nagging about chores that needed to be done. Whenever they needed a babysitter to look after me, they always called my older cousin, Jenna, to take care of things since she had watched me numerous times before. They also asked our neighbor, Ariel, to occasionally check in on the house, as there had been reports of missing children in the area at the time. I remember it was around 7 p.m. when my cousin Jenna arrived. My parents gave her a quick rundown of what needed to be done and then headed off to the work event. Jenna and I went to the living room to watch some episodes of SpongeBob and even played some video games on my PlayStation. As the night went on, Jenna told me that her boyfriend was going to stop by the house for an hour or two and that she wanted to go buy some wine from the liquor store before he arrived. At the time, I didn't care what Jenna did, as I honestly just wanted to enjoy my video games without any distractions. I remember Jenna kindly asking me, "Do you want to come with me in the car?" "No, thanks," I replied without taking my eyes off the TV screen. "Alright, suit yourself, kiddo. I'll be back in 10 minutes tops, and please don't open the door for anyone, okay?" I nodded without taking my eyes off the TV as Jenna locked the door with the spare key my parents had given her. I remember my stomach starting to growl from hunger, as I hadn't eaten much that day, so I decided to head to the kitchen for a quick snack. I got up from the sofa, and just then, I heard a loud knock on the door. In the moment I stood up, I completely ignored Jenna's advice not to open the door, convinced that the person knocking was her. I opened the door, and to my surprise, I saw our neighbor Ariel. I waved politely and said, "Hi, what are you doing here?" "Josh, where's your cousin?" "I don't know, she just went to the store to buy something." I was a bit surprised to see that Ariel was visibly sweating profusely, almost as if she had just finished exercising. Then she said frantically, "When is she coming back? And why did she leave you home alone?" "I don't know, she said she'd be back in about 10 minutes or so." "Touch it." "What?" "Touch it, or I'll tell your parents that you opened the door to a stranger. Now, touch it." At that moment, I was too young to understand what was going on, so I said, "Touch what?" That's when my cousin Jenna started pulling into the driveway and immediately ran up to the front porch, sensing something was wrong because of the way my neighbor looked. "What's going on, guys?" Jenna asked. Ariel nervously replied, "Oh, nothing at all. I was just stopping by to make sure you were both safe, okay?" Then she added, "Have a good night," and casually walked back to her house. Jenna and I went inside and continued playing video games as if the encounter with my neighbor hadn't happened. For the rest of the night, I remember wondering what my neighbor meant by touch it and why our behavior completely changed the moment my cousin pulled into the driveway. Honestly, I was too naive and shy to bring up the strange encounter with my cousin or even my parents, as I didn't know what was right or wrong, considering I was only 7 years old at the time. Fast forward several years, and it was reported that my neighbor had been arrested by the authorities for torturing and keeping children captive in her basement. It was rumored that she had been known for gaining the trust of neighborhood parents and stalking their children while the parents were away. Now, as an adult, I still think about that night from time to time, as it sickens me to realize what her true intentions might have been during our interaction. By sharing my story with the world, I can only hope that no child ever opens the door to a stranger, even if it's their neighbor. This is a strange story, but I swear it's true, and my girlfriend can confirm what I saw that night. My girlfriend had a babysitting job at a countryside house in the middle of nowhere. The place was surrounded by woods, about a 10-minute drive from the nearest town, with no neighbors or anything around. The idea of staying there alone all night made her a bit uneasy, so, of course, I agreed to go there after work and spend the night with her and the child she was watching. When I arrived, the silence in the area was a bit eerie, to be honest. There were no crickets, No sounds, not even the wind. The place just lacked sound, if that makes sense. That kind of thing is a little unsettling in the daylight and much more so at night. So, the night went on, and my girlfriend put the child to bed. We decided to relax for a couple of hours and watch a movie that was on TV, though I don't remember exactly which one. We were both relaxed, cuddled up on the couch, when suddenly we both heard the front door open. Whoever opened it didn't try to be quiet or conceal their steps at all. In such a silent environment, their boots sounded like weights hitting the floor, and the footsteps grew louder as the person moved down the hallway toward the living room where we were. Here's the strangest part. Both my girlfriend and I felt perfectly calm, not scared at all. We have no idea why, but it didn't even occur to us to be afraid or worried. We felt strangely peaceful and at ease. The person walked into the room. He was a large man, probably in his 40s, well-built. He walked in without hesitation and then simply stopped and looked at us. The smell of stale cigarette smoke hit us immediately, but still, we didn't react. We remained perfectly calm. He stared at us with wide eyes, unblinking, and we looked back at him as if his presence was the most natural thing in the world. My heart wasn't racing or anything. He had this cowboy-like presence, if that makes sense, relaxed but stern and serious, cool but dangerous. He wasn't wearing spurs or a cowboy hat, just jeans, a shirt, a bit of stubble, and dark circles under his eyes. "Can we help you, sir?" I asked genuinely. He took a deep breath and said, "Don't go out into those woods tonight. I'm taking someone, and it shouldn't be you, understand?" "All right, we'll wait until morning then," I responded, not thinking twice. The man nodded slightly, turned around, and walked out of the house as calmly as he had entered. My girlfriend and I stayed on the couch, still strangely tranquil, not saying a word for a few minutes. Then, we just looked at each other, not fully understanding what had just happened, but not feeling the urgency to analyze it either. It was only later, after the calm had worn off, that the reality of the situation started to sink in. We still don't know who that man was, what he was doing, or why we felt so unbothered by his presence. But we both remember that night vividly and the overwhelming sense of calm that washed over us. The night continued in silence, and neither of us mentioned the incident again. To this day, I can't explain what we saw or why we felt so at peace in that moment. But every time I think about that night, I wonder who that man was and what, or who, he was taking into those woods. He nodded, turned around, and walked back down the hallway toward the front door. We heard it close behind him, and he was gone. We went back to watching our movie as if nothing had happened. Then we went to bed without any concern. It wasn't until the next morning, when we both woke up, that we realized how disturbing the whole encounter had been. We couldn't understand why we felt nothing when he came in. We asked the child if he had any relatives or anyone he knew who fit that description. He didn't. Later, we asked his parents, who also didn't know anyone like that. They were angry with us and asked why we didn't call the police or them. We didn't have an answer. 12 months later, it was reported that a skeleton had been unearthed in those very woods. The police started digging in the area, and a week later, another skeleton was discovered. In the months that followed, bones belonging to 5 separate victims were uncovered. God knows how long they had been there. Since then, there has been a constant police presence in those woods. I don't know who that man was who entered the house that night, but both my girlfriend and I saw and heard exactly the same thing, and we remember it the same way. Why did we both feel so calm that night, so unconcerned? It was a strange and chilling experience that we will never forget, but I'm grateful that we weren't the ones he took that night. I was around 13 or 14 years old, babysitting 2 kids for some members of my church. I had done it before, and the kids loved having me as their sitter, and the parents were very comfortable with me. This was a night when they were going to be out until around 2:30 in the morning. I was doing it for free that day because they were going to do something related to the church, and that's just how I operated. Anyway, the house they lived in was part of a small apartment complex, one of those with 2 floors and 4 apartments in each block. They were on the ground floor, with 2 bedrooms on either side of the apartment, a kitchen to the left, a living room to the right with a sliding glass door leading to the patio, and a bathroom next to the front door. It was around 1:30 in the morning, I think, and I knew they'd be home soon. The kids were asleep, and I had finished my homework. They didn't have cable, and this was before Netflix became an online service, but they had a couple of DVDs and VHS tapes to watch, so I put on the land before time to make the night go by faster. I was already really tired and had dozed off a couple of times. Around 2 a.m., I heard knocking at the front door. Knowing the parents had a key, I didn't do anything except sit there in the dark with the TV glowing. Being a paranoid person and someone who watches and reads a lot of horror stories, I grabbed the baseball bat that was next to the couch. What happened next will haunt me forever. I heard a small voice, almost like that of a young woman, say, "Oh, honey, that won't help you." My heart stopped, and I realized that the patio door's blinds were up. My eyes slowly moved to the door, and I saw someone standing in the patio, staring at me. I couldn't make out much else, except that they were very short and wide. I screamed and ran to the kids' room. Thankfully, they were still asleep. Unfortunately, this was before I had a cell phone, and there were no cordless phones in the house. The only thing I could do was push the dresser in front of the door and watch the single window in the room. That's when it went dark as a shadow loomed over the window. The knocking started again, and the woman's voice called out, "Come on, honey, I won't hurt you, please come out." The window was being hit so hard that I was afraid it would break. The kids finally woke up, and they were screaming and scared. I was a big girl, and at that point, I could lift my own weight, but knowing I had 2 kids with me, I felt vulnerable and scared. Within 2 seconds, I heard the father yell, "Hey! Who the hell are you?" The person ran off. The front door opened, and there were loud knocks on the kids' bedroom door. Thankfully, it was the parents, and after letting them in, I put the dresser back in place and explained what had happened. They called the police, and when they arrived, they didn't find anything, but the bushes lining the patio had clearly been cut and pulled apart to create a path. I babysat the kids one more time after that, but they moved 5 months later, and I never babysat anyone again. To this day, whenever I hear a knock, a chill runs down my spine. My name is Rita, and I'm 23 years old. I study at a university in Mexico City, and like any student, I often find myself looking for ways to earn some extra money. It was during one of those free weekends that I decided to take a last-minute babysitting job that had been offered to me. I found the ad in a Facebook group for temporary jobs. The title of the ad was pretty straightforward, looking for a babysitter for Saturday night. Good pay. Central area. The pay was decent, and with rent and university expenses, I needed any extra income one could get. I contacted the woman who had posted the ad. Her name was Paula. She sounded friendly on the phone, but there was a sense of urgency in her voice, as if she really needed someone. We quickly agreed on the details, and it was arranged that I would arrive at her house around 7 p.m. Paula explained that her son Diego, who was 6 years old, would already be asleep by the time I got there and that she just needed someone to be in the house just in case. It seemed easy and straightforward. How hard could it be? That evening, I arrived punctually at the address she had given me. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, one of those old but well-maintained buildings with a front garden full of carefully arranged plants. The street was silent, lit only by a few streetlights. I felt a bit nervous as I rang the doorbell, but I reminded myself that it was just one night and that it would be an easy job. Paula answered the door. She was a woman in her 40s, with her hair tied up in a loose bun and a kind but somewhat tired expression. She was dressed simply and seemed a bit rushed, as if she was trying to finish getting ready to go out. She welcomed me in and gave me a quick tour of the house. It was a cozy home, tastefully decorated and full of family photos on the walls. Diego was asleep, she told me as she opened his bedroom door just a crack. Please don't wake him up. It's very important that he sleeps through the night. I nodded, understanding the importance of not disturbing a child's sleep. Paula showed me the rest of the house, including the kitchen, bathroom, and living room. She explained where everything I might need was and left me a contact number in case of emergencies. I'll be back around midnight, she said, smiling. Thanks for coming on such short notice. The house was silent after Paula left. I settled on the living room couch with a book, trying to relax. The hours passed slowly, and I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. I didn't hear any noise from Diego's room, not even the sound of his breathing. I walked over to the door several times, opening it just a crack to make sure everything was okay, but everything seemed quiet. By 10 p.m., my unease turned into concern. I hadn't heard a single sound indicating that the child was there. I approached the door to the room again, and this time, I decided to open it fully. The bed was perfectly made, but it was empty. There was no sign that a child had been sleeping there. My heart started pounding. Where was Diego? Had he gotten up and left the room without me noticing? I searched the entire house, but there was no trace of him, neither in the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room, nor even in the small backyard. There was no sign of the child. Panic began to set in. What if he had left the house? What if someone had taken him? My mind raced with increasingly terrifying possibilities. I tried calling Paula, but her phone was off. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to call the police and cause a panic if it was just a misunderstanding, but at the same time, the situation was becoming unbearable. I decided to sit in the living room and wait, keeping a close eye on the front door. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, around midnight, I heard the door open. Paula walked in smiling, but her expression quickly changed when she saw my face. What happened? She asked, alarmed. I can't find Diego, I said, trying to stay calm. I've searched the whole house, but he's not in his room or anywhere else. Paula looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Her eyes filled with tears, and her face contorted with pain. Diego, she whispered. Diego isn't here because he was never here. I didn't understand her words at first. I thought she was in shock, unable to accept that her son was missing. But then, through sobs, she began to explain the truth. Many years ago, Paula had been pregnant and had lost her child in an accident before he was born. The trauma had been so overwhelming that her mind couldn't cope. Over time, she had developed schizophrenia, and in her mind, Diego had been born and was alive. To her, Diego had always been there, growing up and living in that house. The realization of what was happening hit me like a bucket of cold water. There was no child, there never had been. All this time, Paula had been living in a fantasy created by her mind to cope with the pain. It was heartbreaking, beyond anything I could have imagined. That night, after consoling Paula and making sure she was okay, I left her house with a deep sense of sadness. It wasn't fear that I felt, but an overwhelming sorrow for Paula and what she had gone through. I had accepted a babysitting job thinking it would be a quiet, normal night, but I ended up uncovering a tragic story of loss and pain. I'll never forget that night. It was an experience that marked me deeply, reminding me of how fragile the human mind can be and how powerful our emotions are. Since then, whenever I think of that house in Paula, I'm enveloped in a melancholy that's hard to shake. And whenever I hear the silence of an empty house, I can't help but remember the story of Diego, the child who never was, but who lived in his mother's heart. I'm so sorry to hear about this dramatic experience. It sounds like an incredibly difficult and frightening situation, but you handled it with remarkable composure and presence of mind. The events you described, where a child unexpectedly lashes out in such a violent way, underscore how unpredictable human behavior can be, especially in children who may be struggling with underlying issues that aren't immediately visible. Your quick thinking in restraining Maximo and getting help as quickly as possible likely prevented an even worse outcome. The aftermath must have been equally challenging, watching a family you were close to grapple with the reality of Maximo's condition and the impact it had on everyone involved. It's understandable that this experience has made you more cautious and vigilant when accepting babysitting jobs, and it's a wise approach to ensure both your safety and the well-being of the children in your care. If you ever find yourself needing to talk more about what happened, or if you're struggling with lingering feelings from that night, don't hesitate to seek out someone to talk to, whether a trusted friend, family member, or professional counselor. Such experiences can leave lasting impressions, and it's important to take care of your mental health as well. Your story serves as a powerful reminder to anyone in a caregiving role to always be prepared for the unexpected and to prioritize safety above all else. Thank you for sharing it, and I hope both you and the family have found some measure of peace in the time since that night. I almost never accept babysitting jobs in unfamiliar homes, but that night was an exception. I was at a point in my life where I desperately needed money. I had spent weeks looking for temporary jobs, and when I received an offer to babysit a child for a substantial amount of money, paid up front, I couldn't say no. It all started when I received a message from a woman named Melina. She said she urgently needed a babysitter for her son that night and was willing to pay double the usual rate. The message included basic details, her address, the schedule, and the promise of immediate payment via bank transfer. The speed with which the money hit my account was surprising, but I didn't question the luck I seemed to be having. With the money secured, I headed to the provided address, a house in a quiet neighborhood in a city in the United States. Melina's house was large and seemingly well kept. I arrived around 6 p.m., just as the sun was beginning to set. The door opened before I could even ring the bell, and a middle-aged woman with a warm but somewhat tense smile greeted me. "Hi, you must be Andrea. Thanks for coming on such short notice," she said as she ushered me inside. The house was orderly, almost meticulously so. Melina led me to the living room, where she offered me a drink before explaining the tasks for the evening. "My son is in his room, probably sleeping. I don't think you'll have any trouble with him. I just need you to be here to make sure everything is okay while I'm out for a couple of hours." I nodded, mentally noting her instructions. Melina seemed nervous, but I chalked it up to the worry of leaving her child with a new babysitter. After a brief chat, Melina said goodbye and left, leaving me alone in the house. I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone while listening to the silence that filled every corner. About 20 minutes passed before I decided to check on the child to make sure everything was okay. I slowly walked up the stairs, heading to the room at the end of the hallway that Melina had pointed out. When I opened the door, I was met with an unexpected scene. The room was empty. There was no child's bed, no toys, no sign of a child at all. A feeling of unease began to settle in my stomach. Had I made a mistake and entered the wrong room? I moved to another door, but it was also empty. I started to feel that something was very wrong. That's when I heard a noise behind me. I quickly turned around and found myself face to face with a grown man, probably in his mid-30s, looking at me with a disturbing expression. "Are you looking for something?" he asked in a voice that sent a chill down my spine. "I'm looking for the child I'm supposed to be babysitting," I replied, trying to stay calm. The man gave a sinister smile. "There is no child here. Melina never had any children. I'm the one you need to take care of tonight." Panic began to set in. I tried to step back, but the man moved quickly, blocking my way out. His presence was intimidating, and his gaze was unsettling. I started to realize that I had walked right into a trap. The man stepped closer, and my heart was pounding in my chest. I knew I had to do something fast before the situation got worse. Thinking quickly, I pretended to comply with his request. "Okay," I said, forcing a calm tone. "What do you need me to do?" He seemed slightly taken aback by my response, which gave me a moment to scan the room for an escape route. I noticed a window slightly ajar behind me. Without giving him time to react, I lunged toward the window, yanking it open and throwing myself out. I landed hard on the grass outside, but I didn't stop to assess the damage. I got up and ran as fast as I could, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I didn't stop running until I reached a well-lit street, where I immediately flagged down a passing car. The driver, seeing the fear on my face, stopped and let me in. I told them to drive, and as we sped away, I called the police and explained everything. Later, the authorities went to the house, but Melina and the man were gone, and the house was empty, as if no one had lived there for a long time. The money I had received was traced to a fake account, and there was no record of Melina or the man she had mentioned. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. That night changed everything for me. I never took another babysitting job from strangers again, and I became much more cautious about the people I interacted with. It was a terrifying reminder that not everything is as it seems, and that danger can lurk even in the most innocent-seeming situations. "Melina told me to take care of you," I said, trying to buy some time while I searched for a way out. "Maybe we should wait for her to come back." "Melina isn't coming back anytime soon," he replied with a cruel smile, "and you're not going anywhere." At that moment, my survival instincts kicked in. I forced a weak smile, trying to maintain a calm demeanor as I slowly backed toward the door. "Okay, why don't we sit down and talk?" I suggested, hoping to distract him. To my surprise, the man seemed to consider my suggestion, relaxing his stance just a bit. I seized that brief moment to act. With all the strength I could muster, I pushed a nearby bookshelf, knocking it over between him and me. The man lost his balance for a moment, giving me just enough time to dash toward the stairs. I took the steps two at a time, hearing the man's shouts behind me. My only hope was to reach the front door before he caught up to me. I could hear his footsteps closing in, and adrenaline pushed me to run faster than I ever had before. I reached the door, yanked it open, and threw myself outside, screaming for help. The quiet neighborhood street now seemed like a haven, and my voice rang out in the night air. I saw lights flicker on in several houses and heard doors opening. The man didn't follow me outside. Maybe he knew the neighbors were now alerted, or perhaps he didn't want to draw more attention. I didn't stop to think about it. I ran to the nearest house and pounded desperately on the door. An elderly couple answered, and seeing my state, they quickly brought me inside and called the police immediately. The police arrived within minutes. I felt a wave of relief wash over me at the sight of the patrol cars and armed officers. I told them everything that had happened, and they quickly headed to Melina's house. The man was arrested without resistance, and it was discovered that he had a history of disturbing behavior and prior charges for attempted abuse. Melina was later found and turned out to be complicit in the entire plan. Both were arrested and faced charges of attempted kidnapping and abuse. That night left an indelible mark on my memory. What had started as a simple babysitting job turned into a fight for my life. I learned a valuable lesson about caution and the importance of trusting my instincts. Since then, I've been extremely careful when accepting jobs and have never taken a job offer without thoroughly checking out the family first. This experience changed me forever, reminding me that personal safety should always be a priority and that the most ordinary situations can become dangerous in an instant.